The cathedral bells tolled with deafening finality as Edmund Ashford stood frozen at the altar, his eyes locked not on the veiled woman before him, but on the figure standing just behind her, the bridesmaid whose trembling hands clutched a bouquet of white roses. In that crystalline moment of horror, as the vicar's voice droned through the sacred vows, Edmund understood with sickening clarity that he had spent 6 months courting, proposing to, and planning a future with the wrong sister. The realization crashed over him like a tidal wave. Every stolen glance, every whispered conversation in the Ashford gardens, every letter signed with delicate script, all had been with her, with Beatrice, not with the woman whose hand now rested in his. And as 300 guests watched in breathless anticipation, Edmund knew with absolute certainty that it was already far too late to turn back. If you're listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you're listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. The spring of 1887 brought with it an unusual warmth to the English countryside, and with that warmth came the weight of expectation that had settled upon Edmund Ashford's shoulders like an iron mantle. At 28, he was the sole heir to the Ashford fortune, a legacy built upon textile mills, railway investments, and 3 generations of shrewd business acumen. His father, the formidable Lord William Ashford, had made it abundantly clear that Edmund's duty was not merely to inherit, but to expand, to secure, to forge alliances that would cement the family's position among England's industrial aristocracy. The Thornbury girls, his father had announced one evening over port and cigars in the mahogany-panelled study. Excellent lineage. Their father controls half the coal mines in Yorkshire. A union with that family would be advantageous. Edmund had nodded, as he always did, the dutiful son who understood that marriage was not about love, but about legacy. He had been raised in the grand estate of Ashford Manor, where every room whispered of tradition, where portraits of stern ancestors lined the corridors, their painted eyes seeming to judge every decision, every deviation from the prescribed path. His childhood had been one of tutors and expectations, of learning to manage accounts before he learned to ride, of understanding that his life was not entirely his own. The Thornbury family resided at Willowmere House, an imposing Georgian mansion some 20 miles distant, surrounded by manicured gardens and ancient oak trees. Edmund's first visit had been arranged with the precision of a military campaign. His mother, Lady Catherine Ashford, had coordinated with Mrs. Thornbury to ensure the meeting occurred during the spring social season, when the gardens would be at their finest and the family could be displayed to maximum advantage. Edmund remembered that first afternoon with painful clarity. He had arrived in the family carriage, his collar starched to the point of discomfort, his dark hair pomaded into submission. The Thornbury family had assembled in the drawing-room like a tableau vivant. Mr. Thornbury, a broad-shouldered man with mutton chops and an air of industrial prosperity. Mrs. Thornbury, elegant in lavender silk, her smile practiced and calculating, and their 2 daughters. Constance Thornbury, the elder at 24, had been presented first. She was handsome in the conventional sense, tall, with auburn hair arranged in the latest fashion, her posture impeccable, her dress a confection of ivory silk and Belgian lace. She had curtsied with perfect grace, her blue eyes assessing him with the same calculating interest his father used when evaluating a business proposition. "Mr. Ashford," she had said, her voice clear and confident, "we have heard so much about your family's accomplishments. Father speaks most highly of Lord Ashford's vision." Edmund had responded with the appropriate pleasantries, noting how Constance commanded the room, how she spoke of social engagements and charitable committees with the ease of someone who had been trained from birth to manage a great household. She was, he recognized, exactly what his parents expected, a woman who could host dinners for 50, who understood the intricate dance of social hierarchy, who would produce heirs and manage servants with equal efficiency. But then, as tea was being served, the younger sister had entered. Beatrice Thornbury was 22, and she moved through the drawing room like a different species entirely. Where Constance was statuesque, Beatrice was delicate, with honey-coloured hair that seemed to catch the afternoon light streaming through the tall windows. Her dress was simpler, a pale blue muslin that suggested she had been occupied elsewhere, perhaps in the gardens, for there was a smudge of soil on her sleeve that she seemed unaware of. Her eyes, a remarkable shade of grey-green, held not calculation but curiosity, and when she smiled at Edmund, it was with genuine warmth rather than social performance. "Forgive my tardiness," Beatrice had said, her voice softer than her sister's, with a slight breathlessness that suggested she had been hurrying. "I was in the conservatory. The orchids are blooming, and I quite lost track of time." "Mrs." Thornbury had frowned slightly, a minute tightening of her lips that spoke volumes about Beatrice's position in the family hierarchy. "Beatrice has always been more interested in her plants than in proper society," she had said with a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Fortunately, Constance has enough social grace for both of them." The afternoon had proceeded according to script. Edmund had walked with Constance through the formal gardens, discussing the upcoming season, the latest exhibitions at the Royal Academy, the tedious minutiae of their respective social circles. She had been charming, knowledgeable, appropriate in every way, but Edmund's attention had kept drifting to the figure visible through the conservatory windows, Beatrice, kneeling among her plants, her hands gentle as she tended to some delicate bloom, completely absorbed in her private world. Over the following weeks, Edmund had been a frequent visitor to Willowmere House. The courtship had been orchestrated with precision, chaperoned walks, formal dinners, carefully supervised conversations, and always it was Constance who was presented, Constance who sat beside him at dinner, Constance whose hand he was meant to request for the next dance at the county ball. But somehow, inexplicably, it was Beatrice who captured his thoughts. She was always present but peripheral, the younger sister who was expected to fade into the background, to make herself useful but not prominent. Yet Edmund found himself seeking her out, finding excuses to wander toward the conservatory, to ask about her botanical studies, to listen as she spoke with quiet passion about the language of flowers, about the delicate ecosystem she cultivated in glass houses. "Did you know," Beatrice had told him one afternoon, her fingers trailing over the petals of a rare orchid, "that some flowers bloom only once in their lifetime? They wait years, gathering strength, and then, for one brief, perfect moment, they reveal their true beauty, and then they're gone." Edmund had stood transfixed, watching the play of light across her features, the way her entire being seemed to illuminate when she spoke of things she loved. In that moment, he had felt something shift inside him, a recognition that terrified him in its intensity, but the machinery of expectation had already been set in motion. His father had met with Mr. Thornbury to discuss settlements. His mother had begun planning a wedding that would unite two great families, and Edmund, trained from birth to fulfill his duty, had found himself unable to voice the truth that was becoming increasingly undeniable. He had fallen in love with the wrong sister. The proposal had occurred on a mild evening in late summer in the rose garden at Willowmere House. Edmund had rehearsed the words, had the ring in his pocket, a family heirloom, an emerald surrounded by diamonds that had belonged to his grandmother. The families had gathered at a discreet distance, pretending not to watch, while clearly observing every moment. Constance had stood before him, beautiful and composed, her expression one of satisfied anticipation. She had known this moment was coming, had prepared for it as one prepares for any important social engagement. "Miss Thornbury," Edmund had begun, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears, "it would be my greatest honor if you would consent to become my wife." He had knelt, had presented the ring, had performed his role with the precision expected of him, and Constance had accepted with gracious enthusiasm, her hand extended for him to slip the ring onto her finger. Behind her, barely visible in the gathering dusk, Edmund had glimpsed Beatrice standing near the conservatory, her face pale, her hand pressed to her mouth, as if stifling something. A cry, perhaps, or a protest that would never be voiced. The engagement had been announced in the Times, had been celebrated with a grand ball at Ashford Manor, had set in motion the elaborate preparations for a wedding that would be the social event of the season. Edmund had moved through it all as if in a dream, or perhaps a nightmare, smiling and accepting congratulations while feeling as though he were watching his life unfold from a great distance. The wedding date had been set for the following spring, allowing time for the proper preparations. Constance had thrown herself into the planning with military precision, consulting with dressmakers and florists, debating the merits of Venetian versus French lace, orchestrating every detail of what would be a spectacle of wealth and social prominence. And through it all, Edmund had continued to visit Willowmere House, ostensibly to court his fiancée, but finding himself drawn again and again to quiet conversations with Beatrice in the conservatory, to stolen moments where they could speak of books and ideas, of dreams that had nothing to do with social advancement or family duty. They had never touched beyond the formal requirements of social interaction, had never spoken of the feelings that hummed between them like an electric current. But Edmund had known with absolute certainty, that what he felt for Beatrice was everything a marriage should be built upon, and what he felt for Constance was merely appropriate. Now, as the cathedral bells tolled, and 300 guests settled into their pews, as his groomsmen stood beside him and the organ began to play, Edmund understood that he had made the greatest mistake of his life, and there was no way to unmake it. The morning of the wedding dawned with deceptive serenity. Pale sunlight filtered through the stained-glass windows of St. Michael's Cathedral, casting jeweled patterns across the stone floor where Edmund stood, his hands clasped behind his back to hide their trembling. The ancient church, with its soaring Gothic arches and centuries of witnessed vows, had never felt more like a prison. 300 guests filled the pews. The cream of English society, industrial magnates and their wives, distant cousins who had travelled from Scotland, business associates of both families who understood that this union represented more than romance. It represented power, consolidation, the merging of two great fortunes into something even more formidable. Edmund's best man, his childhood friend Thomas Whitmore, stood beside him, occasionally casting concerned glances at Edmund's ashen complexion. "Steady on, old chap," Thomas had whispered earlier in the vestry. "Every groom feels this way. Perfectly natural." But Thomas didn't understand. This wasn't the nervous anticipation of a man about to pledge his life to his beloved. This was the suffocating certainty of a man about to commit an irrevocable error, about to speak vows that would bind him forever to a woman he respected but did not love, while the woman who held his heart stood mere feet away, relegated to the role of witness to his surrender. The organ swelled, and the congregation rose as one. Edmund turned, his breath catching in his throat, and watched as the bridal procession began. First came the flower girls, daughters of various cousins, scattering rose petals with solemn concentration. Then the bridesmaids, a parade of young women in pale pink silk, their faces carefully composed in expressions of joyful solemnity. And there among them was Beatrice. She moved down the aisle with her characteristic grace, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to meet his gaze. The bridesmaid's dress, chosen by Constance to complement rather than compete, somehow made Beatrice more luminous. Her honey-coloured hair was arranged simply, with small white roses tucked into the coils, and her face, Edmund could see even from this distance, was pale, her jaw set with determination. She carried her bouquet of white roses like a shield, her knuckles white from the force of her grip. Their eyes met for one devastating moment. In that brief connection, Edmund saw everything he needed to know. She felt it too, this terrible, impossible love that had grown between them in stolen conversations and unspoken understanding. Her grey-green eyes held such profound sadness that Edmund felt something crack inside his chest. Then she looked away, taking her position to the side of the altar, and the moment was gone. The organ reached its crescendo, and Constance appeared at the cathedral entrance on her father's arm. She was magnificent. Her wedding gown was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Venetian lace, the train extending 12 feet behind her, carried by 2 young attendants. Her veil was secured with a diamond tiara, a gift from the Ashford family, and her auburn hair gleamed beneath it. She moved down the aisle with perfect poise, her smile radiant, her bearing that of a woman who had achieved exactly what she had set out to achieve. This was her triumph, her moment of social ascension, and she wore it like a crown. Mr. Thornbury delivered his daughter to Edmund with a firm handshake and a meaningful look that spoke of business arrangements and expectations. Constance took her place beside Edmund, her hand cool and steady in his, and the vicar began the ancient ceremony. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today." Edmund heard the words as if from underwater. He made the appropriate responses, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Beside him, Constance glowed with satisfaction, her profile serene. To his left, just visible in his peripheral vision, Beatrice stood motionless, her face carefully blank. The ceremony proceeded with agonizing slowness. Hymns were sung, prayers were offered, and still Edmund stood frozen in this nightmare of his own making. He thought of the conversations he and Beatrice had shared in the conservatory at Willowmere House, discussions of poetry and philosophy, of dreams beyond the confines of social expectation. He remembered the afternoon she had shown him a rare night-blooming orchid, how they had stayed up past midnight waiting for it to open, chaperoned by a dozing aunt, speaking in whispers about everything and nothing. He remembered the way her face had transformed when she laughed, unguarded and genuine, so different from Constance's practiced social smile. "If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together," the vicar intoned, "let them speak now, or forever hold their peace." The silence that followed was absolute. Edmund's heart hammered against his ribs. This was the moment, the final opportunity to stop this catastrophic mistake. His mouth opened, words forming on his tongue. "I cannot do this. I love another. I love her sister." But the words died unspoken. He looked out at the congregation, his father's stern face, his mother's proud smile, Mr. Thornbury's satisfied expression, the 300 witnesses who had come to see the union of 2 great families. He thought of the business arrangements, the settlements already signed, the social disgrace that would follow if he spoke now. He thought of what it would do to Constance, to be rejected publicly at the altar. He thought of Beatrice, and what scandal would attach to her if the truth emerged. The moment passed. The vicar continued, "Edmund Charles Ashford, wilt thou have this woman to be thy wedded wife, to live together after God's ordinance in the holy estate of matrimony? Wilt thou love her, comfort her, honour and keep her in sickness and in health, and forsaking all others, keep thee only unto her so long as ye both shall live?" Edmund's throat constricted. He could feel Beatrice's presence like a physical force, could sense without looking that she had closed her eyes, that she was holding herself together through sheer force of will. "I will," he heard himself say, and the words felt like a betrayal of everything true inside him. Constance's hand tightened on his, triumphant. The vicar turned to her, began the same questions, and she responded with clear, confident affirmation. The ring was produced. Edmund's hands shook as he slipped it onto Constance's finger, the gold band that would mark her as his wife, his responsibility, his future. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Edmund lifted Constance's veil with mechanical precision. Her face was radiant, her blue eyes shining with victory. He leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was chaste, formal, and utterly devoid of passion. The congregation erupted in applause. As Edmund and Constance turned to face their guests, to process back down the aisle as husband and wife, Edmund's eyes found Beatrice one final time. She was clapping along with the others, her smile fixed in place, but tears streamed silently down her cheeks. Their gazes locked, and in that moment Edmund understood the full magnitude of what he had done. He had not merely married the wrong woman. He had destroyed any possibility of happiness for three people. Himself, Constance, who would spend her life with a husband who could never truly love her, and Beatrice, who would have to watch her sister live the life that might have been hers. The wedding breakfast at Ashford Manor was a lavish affair. The ballroom had been transformed into a bower of white roses and trailing ivy, with crystal chandeliers casting prismatic light across tables laden with delicacies. Champagne flowed freely, toasts were made, and Edmund and Constance sat at the head table, the perfect picture of newlywed bliss. Edmund performed his role flawlessly, smiling and accepting congratulations, dancing the first waltz with his new wife while guests looked on approvingly. Constance was in her element, holding court, discussing the honeymoon trip to the Italian lakes, already planning the dinner parties she would host as Mrs. Edmund Ashford. But across the ballroom, Edmund could see Beatrice sitting at a table with distant cousins, her face composed but her eyes distant, as if she had retreated somewhere deep inside herself where the pain couldn't reach. She danced when asked, smiled when appropriate, but there was a brittleness to her movements, as if she might shatter at any moment. As the afternoon wore on and the champagne continued to flow, Edmund found himself cornered by his father. Lord William Ashford clapped him on the shoulder with rare approval. "Well done, my boy. Constance will make an excellent wife. The Thornbury connection will open doors we've only dreamed of. You've done your duty admirably." Duty. The word tasted like ashes in Edmund's mouth. The wedding breakfast stretched into evening, and finally, mercifully, it was time for Edmund and Constance to depart for the first night of their honeymoon at the Ashford townhouse in London before embarking for Italy. As they prepared to leave, as Constance went upstairs to change into her travelling clothes, Edmund found himself alone for a moment in the conservatory attached to the manor, a pale echo of the one at Willowmere House, where he and Beatrice had spent so many hours. He heard the door open behind him and turned, hoping against hope that it might be her, that they might have one final moment to speak the truth that had remained unspoken for so long. But it was Constance who entered, resplendent in a travelling suit of deep blue velvet, her face flushed with champagne and triumph. She crossed to him, placed her hand on his arm, and looked up at him with an expression that made his blood run cold. "I know," she said simply. Edmund's heart stopped. "Know what?" "About you and Beatrice." Constance's smile was sharp, knowing. "Did you think I was blind? I saw the way you looked at her, the way you sought her out. I saw it all, Edmund." "Oh, no, Constance, She held up a hand, silencing him. "It doesn't matter. You married me. That's what matters. You chose duty over sentiment, as you should have, as we all must." Her eyes hardened. "Beatrice is a dreamer, Edmund, a silly girl who thinks life is about poetry and flowers. I am your wife now. I am the one who will bear your children, manage your household, stand beside you in society. Whatever you felt, whatever you think you felt, for my sister is irrelevant now. You are mine." The possessiveness in her voice, the cold calculation, struck Edmund like a physical blow. He had known Constance was ambitious, but he had not understood until this moment the depth of her determination, the ruthlessness beneath her polished exterior. "You knew," he said slowly, "and you still—" "Of course I still married you," Constance interrupted. "You are Edmund Ashford. This is the life I was meant to have. Did you think I would step aside for my younger sister, let her have what should be mine?" She laughed, a brittle sound. "Beatrice can have her flowers and her books. I have you and the Ashford name and everything that comes with it. That is worth far more than love, Edmund. You'll come to understand that in time." She turned and swept from the conservatory, leaving Edmund standing alone among the plants, the full horror of his situation finally devastatingly clear. He had not merely married the wrong sister, he had married a woman who had known of his feelings for Beatrice and had claimed him anyway, who saw him not as a partner, but as a prize, a means to the social position she craved. As the carriage pulled away from Ashford Manor, carrying Edmund and Constance toward their new life together, Edmund looked back one final time. In an upper window of the manor, he glimpsed a figure, Beatrice, watching them depart, her hand pressed against the glass, in a gesture that looked like both farewell and surrender. It was, Edmund realized with crushing finality, already far too late to turn back. The months following the wedding were a study in quiet desperation. Edmund and Constance returned from their Italian honeymoon to take up residence in the Ashford townhouse in Belgravia, a magnificent four-story Georgian edifice that Constance immediately set about redecorating to reflect her own tastes. She threw herself into her new role with formidable energy, hosting dinner parties for her father's business associates, joining the most prestigious charitable committees, ensuring that the name Mrs. Edmund Ashford appeared in all the right society columns. To the outside world, they were the perfect couple. Edmund attended to his duties at the family's various business enterprises, sat on boards, made the appropriate appearances at social functions. He played his part with the same mechanical precision he had employed at the altar, speaking when required, smiling when expected, and feeling nothing but a vast, echoing emptiness. At night, in the privacy of their bedroom, the charade became almost unbearable. Constance was dutiful in her wifely obligations, approaching the marriage bed with the same efficiency she brought to managing the household accounts. There was no tenderness, no genuine intimacy, only the clinical fulfillment of expectations, the necessary steps toward producing an heir. Afterward, she would turn away, satisfied that she had performed her role, while Edmund lay awake in the darkness, haunted by thoughts of honey-colored hair and grey-green eyes, of conversations that had fed his soul in ways he hadn't understood until they were lost to him forever. He had not seen Beatrice since the wedding. The Thornbury family had been invited to several of Constance's dinner parties, but Beatrice had always sent her regrets, claiming illness or prior commitments. Edmund understood that she was protecting herself, creating distance from a situation that had become untenable. Still, her absence was a constant ache, a reminder of everything he had sacrificed on the altar of duty. It was in late autumn, 6 months into his marriage, that Edmund received an unexpected letter. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the signature made his heart lurch. Beatrice Thornbury. His hands trembled as he broke the seal, careful to ensure Constance was occupied with her morning correspondence in another room. Dear Edmund, I hope this letter finds you well, though I confess I struggle with the propriety of writing to you at all. However, circumstances compel me to inform you that I am leaving Willowmere House. The atmosphere here has become difficult. Mother believes my continued presence is a reminder of what she calls my failure to secure an appropriate match. And Constance, on her visits home, makes clear that she finds my company uncomfortable. I am removing to London to stay with our great-aunt, Lady Agatha Pemberton, whom you may remember from the wedding. She has graciously offered me residence at her home in Bloomsbury and has suggested I might benefit from engaging with the intellectual circles she frequents. Aunt Agatha has always been the family eccentric, a widow who never remarried, who hosts salons for writers and artists, who believes women should have access to education and purpose beyond marriage. I write not to burden you with my circumstances, but because I thought you should know. Our paths may cross in London, and I wish to spare us both the shock of an unexpected encounter. I hope you have found happiness in your marriage, Edmund. You deserve that, despite everything. Yours in friendship, Beatrice. Edmund read the letter 3 times, his mind racing. Beatrice in London. Beatrice living with the formidable Lady Agatha Pemberton, whom he did indeed remember from the wedding, a striking woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp, intelligent eyes, who had been the only guest to look at him with something like pity during the ceremony. He should have destroyed the letter, should have put Beatrice out of his mind entirely. Instead, he found himself folding it carefully and placing it in the locked drawer of his desk, a talisman of a life that might have been. 3 weeks later, Edmund found himself in Bloomsbury on business, or so he told Constance. In truth, he had manufactured an excuse to visit that particular neighborhood, drawn by a compulsion he couldn't name and didn't want to examine too closely. Lady Agatha's residence was a handsome townhouse on a quiet square, distinguished by the unusual number of people coming and going, artists with paint-stained fingers, women carrying books and portfolios, men in academic dress engaged in animated conversation. Edmund stood across the square for nearly an hour, watching the house, before finally admitting to himself the futility of his vigil. He was turning to leave when the front door opened and Beatrice emerged. She had changed in the months since the wedding. She wore a simple walking dress of deep green wool, her hair arranged in a less elaborate style than fashion dictated, and she carried a leather satchel filled with books. But it was her bearing that struck him most. She moved with a new confidence, a purposefulness that had been absent at Willowmere House, where she had always seemed to be apologizing for taking up space. Their eyes met across the square. For a moment, neither moved. Then Beatrice crossed toward him, her expression carefully neutral. "Edmund," she said quietly, "I wondered if you might come." "I shouldn't be here," he replied, but made no move to leave. "No," she agreed, "you shouldn't. But since you are, would you walk with me? I was heading to the British Museum. Aunt Agatha has arranged for me to attend lectures there. They've recently begun allowing women to audit certain courses." They walked in silence for several minutes, maintaining the proper distance between them, aware of the eyes of passers-by. Finally, Edmund spoke. "You seem different. Happier, perhaps." Beatrice considered this. "Not happier precisely, but more myself, I think. At Willowmere, I was always the disappointing daughter, the one who failed to be what was expected. Here, with Aunt Agatha, I'm discovering that there are other ways to live, other measures of worth beyond making an advantageous marriage." "I'm glad," Edmund said, and meant it, despite the pain it caused him to acknowledge that she was finding fulfillment in a life that didn't include him. "Are you happy, Edmund?" Beatrice asked suddenly, stopping to face him. "In your marriage?" He should have lied, should have said that yes, Constance was everything he could want, that he had no regrets. But standing before Beatrice, he found he couldn't maintain the pretense. "No," he said simply, "I am not happy. I made a terrible mistake, Beatrice. I married the wrong sister, and I knew it even as I spoke the vows. I was a coward, too afraid of disappointing my family, too bound by duty to choose what my heart wanted." Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "Don't say such things, Edmund. What's done is done. You are married to Constance. You have obligations, responsibilities. Whatever we felt, whatever we might have had, it's impossible now." "I know," Edmund said bitterly. "Believe me, I know. Constance made that abundantly clear on our wedding day. She knew, Beatrice. She knew how I felt about you, and she married me anyway because she wanted the Ashford name and fortune more than she wanted a husband who loved her." Beatrice looked stricken. "That sounds like Constance," she said softly. "She has always been determined to have what she believes she deserves. I'm sorry, Edmund. Sorry that you're trapped, and sorry that I cannot offer you any comfort beyond friendship." "Friendship," Edmund repeated. "Is that possible? Can we be friends, given everything?" "I don't know," Beatrice admitted, "but perhaps we might try. Aunt Agatha hosts a salon every Thursday evening. Writers, artists, academics, reformers, people who discuss ideas rather than gossip. You would be welcome if you wished to attend. Constance would likely find it too bohemian for her tastes, but you might find it refreshing. It was an offering, Edmund understood, a way for them to see each other in a context that was socially acceptable, surrounded by others, where their connection could be explained as intellectual rather than emotional. It was dangerous, foolish even, but Edmund found himself nodding. "I would like that very much," he said. The following Thursday, Edmund informed Constance that he would be dining at his club, a lie that came more easily than it should have. Instead, he made his way to Bloomsbury, to Lady Agatha's townhouse, where he was greeted by the formidable lady herself. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her sharp eyes assessing him with uncomfortable accuracy. "Beatrice mentioned you might attend. Welcome to my humble gathering. We value honest discourse here, and we don't stand on ceremony. You'll find us a rather unconventional lot." The salon was unlike anything Edmund had experienced. The drawing room was filled with people engaged in passionate debate, a novelist arguing with a journalist about the responsibility of art, a female physician discussing the need for women's medical colleges, a young poet reading verses that challenged conventional morality. Beatrice moved through the gathering with ease, contributing to conversations, her intelligence and insight valued rather than dismissed. Edmund found himself drawn into a discussion with a professor from University College London about economic reform, then into a debate about the merits of the new Married Women's Property Act. For the first time in months, he felt his mind engaged, challenged, alive. And throughout the evening, he was aware of Beatrice's presence, of the occasional glance they exchanged, of the way she smiled when he made a particularly astute point. As the evening drew to a close, Lady Agatha drew Edmund aside. "A word of caution, Mr. Ashford," she said quietly. "I can see what lies between you and my great niece. I am not blind, nor am I a fool. You are married, and that is a fact that cannot be changed. If you attend these gatherings, it must be for the intellectual stimulation, nothing more. Beatrice has suffered enough. I will not allow her to be hurt further by an impossible situation. Do I make myself clear?" "Perfectly clear, Lady Agatha," Edmund replied, chastened. "I have no intention of compromising Beatrice's reputation or causing her pain. I value her friendship, her mind, the conversations we can have. See that it remains so," Lady Agatha said sternly. "Now, there is someone I'd like you to meet, Dr. Elias Reed. He's a physician who has recently returned from working with the poor in the East End. He's looking for investors to help establish a free clinic. Given your family's charitable interests, you might find his work compelling." She led Edmund across the room to where a tall man with dark hair and thoughtful brown eyes stood examining the books on Lady Agatha's shelves. He was perhaps 35, with the slightly rumpled appearance of someone more concerned with substance than style, and when he turned to greet Edmund, his handshake was firm and his gaze direct. "Dr. Reed," Lady Agatha said, "may I present Mr. Edmund Ashford? Edmund, Dr. Elias Reed has been doing remarkable work in Whitechapel. I thought you two should speak." As Lady Agatha moved away, Dr. Reed smiled. "I hope Lady Agatha hasn't oversold my efforts. The work is necessary, but hardly remarkable, simply providing basic medical care to those who cannot afford it." "That sounds precisely remarkable to me," Edmund said, finding himself genuinely interested. "Tell me more." As Dr. Reed described his vision for a clinic that would serve the poorest residents of London's East End, Edmund found himself impressed by the man's passion and practical approach. But he also noticed something else. The way Dr. Reed's eyes followed Beatrice across the room, the slight softening of his expression when she joined their conversation, contributing insights about the medicinal properties of various plants that might be grown inexpensively to supplement the clinic's supplies. "Miss Thornbury has been invaluable," Dr. Reed said warmly. "Her knowledge of botany has practical applications I hadn't considered. She's been helping me develop a garden plan for the clinic. herbs and plants that can be used for basic remedies. Beatrice blushed at the praise, but Edmund could see her pleasure in being valued for her expertise. And he could see, too, the way Dr. Reed looked at her, with respect, certainly, but also with something deeper, something that made Edmund's chest tighten with an emotion he recognized as jealousy, but had no right to feel. As Edmund made his way home that evening, walking through the London streets rather than taking a cab, he found himself caught between conflicting emotions. He had enjoyed the evening immensely, had felt more alive than he had in months, but he had also seen the possibility of Beatrice finding happiness with someone else, someone free to court her properly, someone who could offer her the life she deserved. And Edmund understood, with painful clarity, that if he truly cared for Beatrice, he would have to find a way to let her go, to step back and allow her to build a life that didn't include him, even as his own marriage remained a gilded cage from which there was no escape. Winter descended upon London with unusual severity, bringing with it a social season that glittered with particular brilliance against the grey cold. Edmund had become a regular attendee at Lady Agatha's Thursday salons, each visit requiring increasingly elaborate excuses to Constance, who had grown suspicious of his frequent absences. Their marriage had settled into a pattern of cold civility. Constance managed the household and social calendar with ruthless efficiency, while Edmund retreated into his work and his Thursday evenings in Bloomsbury, the only hours of the week when he felt truly himself. Beatrice had flourished under Lady Agatha's guidance. She had begun writing articles on botanical subjects for progressive journals, her byline appearing alongside those of established scientists. She attended lectures, participated in debates, and had become an integral part of the intellectual circle that gathered at her great-aunt's home. And increasingly, Dr. Elias Reed had become a fixture at her side. Edmund watched their growing friendship with emotions he had no right to feel. Dr. Reed was everything Edmund should have been: free, honourable, able to court Beatrice openly. He brought her specimens from his travels through the city, consulted her on the medicinal garden taking shape at his clinic, listened to her ideas with genuine respect. And Beatrice, Edmund could see, was beginning to respond to his attentions, her smiles coming more easily, her laughter more frequent. It was Lady Agatha who finally forced the situation to a head. In early December, she announced that she would be hosting a grand winter ball, not the usual intimate salon, but a proper society event that would bring together her bohemian circle with London's more conventional elite. "It's time," she declared one Thursday evening, "to demonstrate that intellectual pursuit and social respectability need not be mutually exclusive. I intend to show London society that women of intelligence and purpose can hold their own in any setting. Beatrice, my dear, you shall be my co-host. It's time you stepped out of your sister's shadow and claimed your own place in the world." The announcement sent ripples through both social circles. Invitations to Lady Agatha's ball became highly coveted. Her reputation as an eccentric bluestocking made the event intriguing to those who normally avoided intellectual gatherings, while her impeccable lineage and substantial fortune ensured that even the most conventional families could not dismiss the invitation without giving offence. Edmund knew with sinking certainty that Constance would insist they attend, and he was right. When the invitation arrived, embossed on heavy cream paper, Constance's eyes lit with calculation. "Lady Agatha Pemberton," she mused. "I've heard she's quite influential despite her peculiar interests. And it says here that Beatrice will be co-hosting. How unexpected. We must attend, of course. It will be interesting to see what my little sister has made of herself." There was something sharp in Constance's tone, an edge of competition that Edmund had come to recognize. Despite her triumph in securing the marriage she wanted, Constance remained perpetually vigilant against any perceived threat to her position. The idea that Beatrice might be establishing her own social standing, independent of the Thornbury family's traditional sphere, clearly rankled. The night of the ball arrived with a bitter cold that frosted the windows of Lady Agatha's townhouse, though inside the rooms blazed with warmth and light. The house had been transformed, the usual comfortable clutter of books and papers cleared away, replaced by elegant floral arrangements that Edmund recognized as Beatrice's work. Hothouse orchids and winter roses created cascades of color, and Edmund noticed that each arrangement included symbolic flowers: white camellias for admiration, red roses for respect, and delicate sprigs of rosemary for remembrance. Beatrice stood at the entrance beside Lady Agatha, greeting guests with a poise that took Edmund's breath away. She wore a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the grey-green of her eyes, her honey-coloured hair arranged in an elegant style that was fashionable without being ostentatious. A simple strand of pearls, Lady Agatha's, Edmund suspected, adorned her throat. She looked every inch a lady of consequence, but there was something more, a confidence, an assurance that came from knowing her own worth rather than from social position. When Edmund and Constance arrived, there was a moment of electric tension. Beatrice's composure faltered slightly as her eyes met Edmund's, but she recovered quickly, greeting them both with perfect courtesy. "Constance, Edmund, how lovely that you could attend. Aunt Agatha and I are delighted to have you." Constance's smile was sharp as cut glass. "Beatrice, how charming you look. Quite the transformation from the girl who spent her days in the conservatory. I hardly recognize you." "People change when given the opportunity to grow," Lady Agatha interjected smoothly, her tone making clear that she had taken Constance's measure and found it wanting. "Do come in. You'll find the company stimulating, I trust." As they moved into the ballroom, Edmund could feel Constance's irritation radiating beside him. The gathering was indeed a unique blend, members of Parliament conversing with artists, society matrons engaged in animated discussion with female physicians, younger sons of noble families debating with journalists and reformers. It was exactly the kind of event that Constance would normally dismiss as too unconventional, but the presence of so many influential figures meant she couldn't afford to show disdain. Edmund found himself drawn into conversation with several of Lady Agatha's regular attendees, discussing the recent expansion of voting rights and the ongoing debates about Irish Home Rule. But his attention kept drifting to Beatrice, who moved through the gathering with grace, introducing guests to one another, facilitating conversations, demonstrating a natural gift for hospitality that was rooted in genuine interest rather than social calculation. And always Dr. Elias Reed was nearby. Edmund watched as the physician brought Beatrice a glass of champagne as they shared a private laugh over some comment, as Reed's hand briefly touched Beatrice's elbow to guide her through the crowd. Small gestures that spoke of growing intimacy, of a connection that was developing naturally, without the weight of impossibility that had always shadowed Edmund's feelings for her. It was Constance who precipitated the confrontation. Midway through the evening, as couples took to the floor for a waltz, she appeared at Beatrice's side with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Beatrice, dear sister, you must dance with Edmund. It would be quite the family tableau, the sisters Thornbury, each with their proper partner. Dr. Reed, you don't mind if I borrow my sister for a moment, do you? I'm sure you and Edmund can entertain each other." It was a calculated move, Edmund realized, Constance asserting her claim, reminding everyone present of the established order. Beatrice belonged to the family that Constance now headed as the elder married sister, and Edmund belonged to Constance. The dance would be a public demonstration of these facts. But before Beatrice could respond, Dr. Reed spoke up, his voice pleasant but firm. "Actually, Mrs. Ashford, I had just asked Miss Thornbury for this dance. I hope you'll forgive me for claiming her first." He offered his arm to Beatrice, who took it with visible relief, and they moved onto the dance floor, leaving Constance standing with a frozen smile and Edmund caught between admiration for Reed's intervention and jealousy at seeing Beatrice in another man's arms. How presumptuous! Constance hissed under her breath. A physician, and one who works in the slums at that. What can Beatrice be thinking, encouraging his attentions? Perhaps she's thinking that he's a good man who treats her with respect, Edmund said quietly, surprising himself with his boldness. Constance turned to him, her eyes narrowing. You're defending her, still. After all these months, after everything, you're still pining for my sister like some lovesick boy. Constance, don't deny it, Edmund. I've watched you at these gatherings. Yes, I know you've been attending Lady Agatha's salons. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I have friends everywhere. I've known for weeks that you've been coming here, finding excuses to see Beatrice. Edmund felt the blood drain from his face. Nothing improper has occurred. We've barely spoken beyond polite conversation in company. I've done nothing to dishonor you or compromise Beatrice. No, you've simply made it abundantly clear that you wish you could, Constance said bitterly. Do you know how humiliating it is, Edmund, to know that my own husband wishes he had married my sister? To see the way you look at her even now. For the first time since their wedding, Edmund felt a flash of sympathy for his wife. She had gotten what she wanted, the marriage, the position, the Ashford name, but she had not gotten his heart, and despite her calculating nature, that absence clearly wounded her. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. I never intended to hurt you, Constance. I tried to do my duty, to be the husband you deserved. But you failed, Constance said flatly. And now I must watch as Beatrice builds a life for herself, as she attracts the attention of men like Dr. Reed, as she becomes the darling of Lady Agatha's circle. She was supposed to fade into obscurity, to become a spinster aunt, grateful for whatever scraps of life came her way. Instead, she's flourishing, and I'm left with a husband who wishes he had chosen differently. Before Edmund could respond, the music ended, and Beatrice and Dr. Reed returned from the dance floor. Reed's expression was animated, clearly pleased with the conversation they'd been having, and Beatrice looked happier than Edmund had seen her in months. Lady Agatha appeared at that moment, her timing impeccable. Beatrice, my dear, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Lord Hartwell has just arrived. He's a patron of the Royal Botanical Gardens and has expressed interest in your work on medicinal plants. Dr. Reed, perhaps you'd join us? Your clinic project might interest him as well. As Beatrice and Reed moved away with Lady Agatha, Constance turned to Edmund with cold determination. I want you to stop attending these gatherings. No more Thursday salons, no more intellectual evenings in Bloomsbury. You are my husband, and I will not have you mooning over my sister in front of half of London. Constance, I've done nothing wrong. You've made me look foolish, Constance interrupted. That is wrong enough. From now on, your evenings will be spent at home or at functions that I approve. Is that clear? Edmund looked across the room to where Beatrice stood, her face animated as she spoke with Lord Hartwell, Dr. Reed at her side. He saw her future unfolding, a life of purpose and intellectual fulfillment, perhaps eventually a marriage to someone like Reed, who could appreciate her gifts and offer her genuine partnership. And he saw his own future, bound to Constance, trapped in a marriage of convenience that had become a prison, forever watching from a distance as the woman he loved built a life without him. Crystal clear, he said quietly. But as the evening drew to a close, as guests began to depart, Dr. Reed approached Edmund with an unexpected request. Mr. Ashford, might I have a word in private? They stepped into Lady Agatha's study, and Reed closed the door behind them. His expression was serious, his usual affability replaced by something more grave. I'll be direct, Mr. Ashford. I've come to care deeply for Miss Thornbury. My intentions toward her are entirely honourable. I wish to court her properly, with the aim of eventually asking for her hand in marriage. He paused, his eyes meeting Edmund's steadily. But I'm not blind. I see the way you look at her and the way she struggles not to look at you. Before I proceed, I need to know, do you intend to interfere? Because if there's any chance that that circumstances might change, I would rather know now than cause Miss Thornbury further pain. Edmund felt as though he was standing at a crossroads, facing a choice that would determine not just his own future, but Beatrice's as well. He could tell Reed the truth, that he loved Beatrice, that he had made a terrible mistake, that if circumstances were different, he would fight for her. But what good would that do? He was married to Constance, bound by vows and social convention and the weight of family expectation. There was no honorable path forward for him and Beatrice, no way to undo the choice he had made at that altar. But Dr. Reed could offer Beatrice everything Edmund could not: freedom, respect, a partnership built on shared values and genuine affection. Reed could give her the life she deserved. "No," Edmund said, the word tasting like ashes. "I will not interfere. Beatrice deserves happiness, and I believe you can provide that. You have my blessing, Dr. Reed, for whatever that's worth." Reed's expression softened with something like pity. "Thank you for your honesty, Mr. Ashford. I'm sorry for your situation. Truly." As Edmund left Lady Agatha's house that night, Constance silent and furious beside him in the carriage, he felt as though he had just severed the last thread connecting him to the possibility of happiness. He had given Beatrice her freedom, had stepped aside to let her build a life with someone who could truly be her partner. It was the right thing to do, the honorable thing, but it felt like dying. Spring arrived with unexpected gentleness, bringing with it news that spread through London's drawing rooms like wildfire. Dr. Elias Reed had proposed to Miss Beatrice Thornbury, and she had accepted. The announcement appeared in the Times on a mild April morning, and Edmund read it 3 times before the words truly penetrated, each reading feeling like a fresh wound. Mr. and Mrs. Harold Thornbury are pleased to announce the engagement of their daughter, Miss Beatrice Thornbury, to Dr. Elias Reed of the East London Medical Mission. The wedding will take place in June at St. George's Church, Bloomsbury, with a reception to follow at the residence of Lady Agatha Pemberton. Constance read the announcement over breakfast, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said finally, setting down her teacup with deliberate precision, "it seems my sister has managed to secure a match after all. A physician who works with the poor. Hardly what Mother hoped for, but I suppose it's better than spinsterhood." Edmund said nothing, unable to trust his voice. He should feel relief, he told himself. Beatrice would be happy with Reed, would have the partnership and respect she deserved. This was the outcome he had hoped for when he'd given Reed his blessing. But knowing something intellectually and accepting it emotionally were entirely different matters. "We'll attend, of course," Constance continued. "It would look peculiar if we didn't, and I confess I'm curious to see what sort of wedding Beatrice and Aunt Agatha will arrange. No doubt it will be unconventional." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a special kind of torture for Edmund. He threw himself into his work, spending long hours at the office, accepting every business obligation that arose. Constance, meanwhile, had news of her own. She was with child, a development that should have brought Edmund joy, but instead felt like another lock clicking into place on his cage. He would be a father, bound even more irrevocably to a marriage that had never been more than a business arrangement dressed in wedding finery. "You might show more enthusiasm," Constance said coldly when he received the news with muted congratulations. "This is what we married for, Edmund, to produce an heir, to continue the Ashford line. Surely you can pretend to be pleased." "I am pleased," Edmund said, and part of him was. A child was innocent of the circumstances of its conception, deserving of love regardless of the state of its parents' marriage. "Truly, Constance, this is wonderful news." But even as he spoke the words, he thought of Beatrice, of the children she might have with Reed, of the family they would build together based on genuine affection rather than dynastic obligation. The contrast was almost unbearable. Lady Agatha sent a personal invitation to Edmund, delivered by hand rather than through the post. The note was brief, but pointed. "Mr. Ashford, your presence at Beatrice's wedding would mean a great deal to her, despite everything. She values your friendship and hopes you will share in her happiness. I trust you will conduct yourself with the dignity and restraint the occasion demands." AP. The wedding day arrived with perfect June weather, the kind of crystalline morning that seemed designed for new beginnings. St. George's Church in Bloomsbury was smaller and less grand than the cathedral where Edmund had married Constance, but it was filled with warmth and genuine celebration. The guests were an eclectic mix: Lady Agatha's intellectual circle, Reed's colleagues from the medical mission, a smattering of Thornbury relatives who had made the journey, and a few representatives from London society who were curious about this unconventional match. Edmund and Constance arrived early, taking their seats near the front as family. Constance wore lavender silk and an expression of polite interest, while Edmund felt as though he were moving through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. The church was decorated simply but beautifully, arrangements of wildflowers and herbs rather than formal hothouse blooms, reflecting Beatrice's love of natural beauty over ostentation. The ceremony began with the arrival of Dr. Reed, who stood at the altar with an expression of such genuine happiness that Edmund felt a pang of envy so sharp it was almost physical. Reed was a good man, Edmund reminded himself. He would make Beatrice happy in ways Edmund never could have, trapped as he was by family obligation and social expectation. Then the organ began to play, and Beatrice appeared at the church entrance on her father's arm. She was radiant. Her wedding gown was simpler than Constance's had been, ivory silk, without excessive ornamentation, with delicate embroidery of botanical motifs along the hem and sleeves. Her veil was held in place by a circlet of fresh flowers rather than diamonds, and she carried a bouquet of white roses and rosemary, the same flower she had held as a bridesmaid at Edmund's wedding, but this time as the bride, claiming her own happiness. As she processed down the aisle, her eyes found Edmund's for just a moment. In that brief connection, he saw everything: gratitude for stepping aside, sorrow for what might have been, and a quiet determination to embrace the future she had chosen. Then she looked ahead to where Reed waited, and her face transformed with a smile of such genuine joy that Edmund felt his heart break and heal simultaneously. The ceremony was beautiful in its simplicity. The vicar spoke of partnership and mutual respect, of building a life based on shared values and genuine affection. Reed's vows were heartfelt, promising to honor Beatrice's intelligence and independence, to support her work and dreams, to be her partner in every sense of the word. And Beatrice's vows, spoken in her clear, soft voice, promised the same: a marriage of equals, of minds and hearts aligned. When the vicar pronounced them husband and wife, and Reed kissed his bride with tender reverence, Edmund felt Constance's hand tighten on his arm. He glanced at her and saw something unexpected in her expression, not triumph or satisfaction, but a kind of wistful sadness, as if she too recognized what was missing from their own marriage. The reception at Lady Agatha's house was a joyful affair, lacking the rigid formality of Edmund's wedding breakfast. Guests mingled freely, toasts were made with genuine warmth, and Beatrice and Reed moved through the gathering hand in hand, clearly delighted with each other and with the life they were about to begin. Edmund maintained his distance, speaking with other guests, accepting congratulations on his impending fatherhood, playing the role of the contented married man. But he was acutely aware of Beatrice's presence, of her laughter, of the way she looked at her new husband with affection and trust. It was late in the afternoon when Lady Agatha approached him in the garden, where he had retreated for a moment of solitude. "Mr. Ashford," she said, her tone gentler than usual, "I wanted to thank you." Edmund looked at her in surprise. "Thank me? For what?" "For letting her go," Lady Agatha said simply. "I know what it cost you to step aside, to give Dr. Reed your blessing. That took courage and genuine love, the kind that puts another's happiness above one's own desires." Edmund's throat tightened. She deserves to be happy. Reed can give her that. "Yes, he can," Lady Agatha agreed. "And she will be happy, I think. But I wanted you to know that your sacrifice was seen and appreciated, even if it can never be acknowledged publicly." She paused, studying him with those sharp eyes. "What will you do now, Mr. Ashford? You have a child coming, a wife who needs you, a life that must be lived, even if it's not the one you would have chosen." "I'll do my duty," Edmund said quietly. "It's all I've ever known how to do." "Duty is important," Lady Agatha said, "but so is finding meaning within the constraints we're given. You cannot have Beatrice, but you can still live a life of purpose. Your work, your child, even your marriage. These things can have value if you choose to invest them with meaning rather than simply enduring them." Before Edmund could respond, Beatrice herself appeared in the garden, still in her wedding gown, her new husband at her side. She hesitated when she saw Edmund, but Reed gently encouraged her forward. "Edmund," Beatrice said softly, "I wanted to thank you for coming. It means more than you know." "I wouldn't have missed it," Edmund said, managing a genuine smile. "You look beautiful, Beatrice, truly happy." "I am happy," she said, and he could hear the truth in her voice. "Elias and I are leaving for the Lake District tomorrow, a brief honeymoon, before we return to begin work on expanding the clinic. We're going to create something meaningful together, something that will help people who have no other options for medical care." "That sounds like exactly the kind of life you were meant to live," Edmund said. "I'm glad you found someone who sees your worth, who values your mind and your gifts." Reed spoke then, his voice kind. "Miss Thornbury, Mrs. Reed, I should say, has told me something of your friendship, Mr. Ashford. I want you to know that I bear you no ill will. The past is past, and we're all moving forward now." It was a generous statement, an offering of peace from a man secure enough in his wife's affection not to feel threatened by what had come before. Edmund shook Reed's hand, feeling the strength and steadiness in his grip. "Take care of her," Edmund said quietly. "She's extraordinary." "I know," Reed replied simply. "And I will." Beatrice stepped forward then, and for one brief moment she placed her hand over Edmund's. "Be happy, Edmund," she whispered. "Find a way to be happy, even if it's not the happiness we once imagined. You deserve that too." Then she was gone, returning to the reception with her husband, leaving Edmund standing in the garden with Lady Agatha, feeling as though he had just witnessed the closing of a chapter, the definitive end of a story that had never truly begun. The journey home that evening was silent. Constance sat across from Edmund in the carriage, her hand resting on her still, flat stomach, her expression thoughtful. Finally, she spoke. "That's what a real marriage looks like, isn't it?" she said quietly. "What Beatrice and Dr. Reed have, partnership, genuine affection, all the things we don't have and never will." Edmund looked at his wife, really looked at her, and saw past the calculating social climber to the woman beneath, someone who had gotten everything she thought she wanted and was discovering it wasn't enough. "No," he agreed, "we don't have that. But we have a child coming, Constance, an innocent life that deserves better than parents who resent each other. Perhaps we can't have love, but we could try for respect, for civility, for making the best of the choices we've made." Constance was quiet for a long moment. "I knew you loved her," she said finally. "Even before the wedding I knew. But I wanted the Ashford name more than I wanted a husband who loved me. I thought it would be enough. The position, the wealth, the social standing. But watching Beatrice today, seeing what she has—" She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "But you're right. We have a child to think of now. Perhaps we can find a way to be better than we have been." It wasn't love, Edmund thought. It would never be love. But it was perhaps the beginning of something, an understanding, a truce, a commitment to building something worthwhile from the ruins of their romantic illusions. As the carriage rolled through the London streets toward their Belgravia townhouse, Edmund thought of Beatrice beginning her honeymoon journey, travelling toward a future filled with purpose and partnership. He felt the weight of his own choices, the consequences of that moment at the altar when he had been too much a coward to speak the truth. But he also felt, for the first time since his wedding day, a small spark of something that might eventually become acceptance. He had lost Beatrice, had given up the possibility of the life he truly wanted, but he still had a life to live, a child to raise, work to do that could make a difference in the world. It wasn't the happiness he had dreamed of. But perhaps, with time and effort, it could be enough. The carriage turned onto their street, and Edmund saw the lights of their townhouse glowing in the gathering dusk. Home, such as it was. A gilded cage, perhaps, but one he would have to learn to inhabit with grace. Beatrice had found her freedom. Now Edmund would have to find his own, within the constraints that bound him. 18 months had passed since Beatrice's wedding, and autumn had returned to London with its familiar palette of gold and amber. Edmund stood at the window of his study in the Belgravia townhouse, watching the leaves drift down from the plane trees that lined the street, and reflected on how much had changed, and how much had remained stubbornly the same. His daughter Catherine, named for his mother as tradition demanded, was 6 months old, a robust infant with Constance's auburn hair and, Edmund hoped, a temperament more gentle than either of her parents. Fatherhood had surprised him with its intensity. He had expected to feel duty toward his child, obligation, the weight of continuing the family line. What he hadn't expected was the fierce, protective love that had seized him the first time he held Catherine's tiny form, the way his heart contracted when she smiled at him, the profound desire to give her a better life than the one he had known, one where she might choose her own path rather than having it prescribed by family expectation. Constance had softened somewhat since Catherine's birth. Motherhood suited her in ways Edmund hadn't anticipated. She was attentive and surprisingly tender with their daughter, and the calculating edge that had always defined her had dulled slightly, replaced by a focus on their child's welfare. Their marriage remained what it had always been, a partnership of convenience rather than passion, but they had achieved a kind of peace, a mutual respect, built on their shared commitment to Catherine's happiness. Edmund had also found purpose in unexpected places. Inspired by Dr. Reed's work, he had begun directing more of the Ashford family's charitable efforts toward practical causes, funding schools in poor neighborhoods, supporting medical clinics, investing in housing reform. His father had grumbled about radical notions, but Edmund had persisted, discovering that using his wealth and position to create meaningful change provided a satisfaction that business success never had. He still thought of Beatrice, though the sharp pain of loss had mellowed into something more bearable, a bittersweet awareness of what might have been, tempered by genuine happiness for the life she had built. He received occasional news through Lady Agatha, who had remained a friend despite the complicated history. Beatrice and Elias had established themselves in a modest house near the East London Medical Mission, where Beatrice had created an extensive medicinal garden that supplied the clinic and served as a teaching resource for local residents. She had published several well-received papers on the therapeutic properties of common plants, and her work was gaining recognition in botanical circles. And Lady Agatha had mentioned in her most recent letter, Beatrice was expecting her first child in the spring. The news had brought Edmund a complex mixture of emotions: joy for Beatrice, a wistful sadness for the family they would never have together, and a renewed commitment to finding meaning in his own life rather than dwelling on impossible alternatives. It was a crisp October afternoon when Edmund received an unexpected visitor at his office. His secretary announced Dr. Elias Reed, and Edmund felt his pulse quicken with a combination of curiosity and apprehension. He and Reed had not spoken since the wedding, maintaining a careful distance that seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Reed entered looking much as Edmund remembered, slightly rumpled, his medical bag in hand, his expression serious but not unfriendly. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for seeing me without notice. I hope I'm not interrupting important business." "Not at all," Edmund said, gesturing to a chair. "Please sit. Is everything well, Beatrice?" "Beatrice is perfectly well," Reed assured him quickly. "Thriving, in fact. This visit is actually about a professional matter, though it does involve her indirectly." He settled into the chair, his hands clasped around his medical bag. "I'm here to ask for your help, Mr. Ashford." The clinic has outgrown its current space, and we need to expand significantly to meet the needs of the community. I've prepared a detailed proposal for a new facility, one that would include not only medical services but also educational programs, a proper medicinal garden that Beatrice would oversee, and training opportunities for young people interested in healthcare. But such an undertaking requires substantial funding, more than our current donors can provide. He withdrew a leather portfolio from his bag and placed it on Edmund's desk. Lady Agatha suggested I speak with you. She said you've been directing the Ashford Charitable Trust toward practical social reform. I'm hoping you might consider this project worthy of investment. Edmund opened the portfolio and began reading. The proposal was thorough and impressive. Detailed budgets, architectural plans, testimonials from patients whose lives had been changed by the clinic's work, statistics demonstrating the desperate need for medical services in London's poorest neighbourhoods. And woven throughout were references to Beatrice's contributions, her medicinal garden that had reduced the clinic's costs for basic remedies, her educational programs teaching local women about herbal treatments and basic health care, her vision for expanding these efforts to serve more people. This is remarkable work, Edmund said, looking up at Reed. The scope of what you're proposing, it could genuinely transform healthcare access for thousands of people. That's the hope, Reed said. But it requires not just funding, but also social credibility. If the Ashford name were attached to this project, it would lend legitimacy that would help us secure additional donors and navigate the bureaucratic obstacles we'll inevitably face. Edmund studied the man across from him, the husband of the woman he had loved, the man who had claimed the life Edmund had wanted. But he saw no rivalry in Reed's eyes, no triumph or gloating, only earnest dedication to work that mattered, and a quiet confidence in his wife's abilities. "Why come to me specifically?" Edmund asked. "There are other wealthy families, other potential donors." Reed met his gaze steadily. "Because Beatrice suggested it. She said that if anyone would understand the value of this work, it would be you. She said you had a good heart, even if circumstances had forced you into a life you didn't choose, and because, frankly, I trust her judgment. If she believes you're the right person to help us, then I believe it too." The simple statement, devoid of jealousy or resentment, moved Edmund more than elaborate speeches could have. Reed was secure enough in his marriage, in Beatrice's love, to seek help from the man who had once loved her, and to do so with grace and dignity. "I'll fund it," Edmund said decisively. "The entire project, and I'll use my family's connections to help secure the necessary permissions and support. This is exactly the kind of work the Ashford Trust should be supporting." Relief flooded Reed's face. "Mr. Ashford, I don't know how to thank you. This will change countless lives." "There is one condition," Edmund interrupted. "I want to be involved in the project, not just as a distant donor, but as an active participant. I want to help with the planning, the implementation. I want to do something that matters, Dr. Reed. I've spent too long simply managing wealth and attending social functions. This could be meaningful work." Reed extended his hand, and Edmund shook it firmly. "We would be honored to have your involvement, Mr. Ashford. Welcome to the East London Medical Mission." Over the following months, Edmund threw himself into the clinic project with an energy he hadn't felt in years. He attended planning meetings in the modest offices near Whitechapel, reviewed architectural drawings, negotiated with contractors and city officials. The work brought him into regular contact with Beatrice and Elias, and Edmund discovered that the three of them could work together with surprising ease, the complicated history between them gradually transforming into something more straightforward, a shared commitment to a cause larger than their personal entanglements. Beatrice, her pregnancy now visible, moved through the planning process with quiet authority. She designed the medicinal garden with meticulous care, planned educational programs, consulted on the layout of treatment rooms to ensure maximum efficiency. Edmund watched her work and felt a profound satisfaction, not the painful longing of before, but genuine happiness that she was using her considerable gifts in ways that mattered. One afternoon in late winter, as they stood together reviewing the construction site where the new clinic was taking shape, Beatrice spoke to him privately for the first time in months. "Edmund, I wanted to thank you. Not just for the funding, though that's transformative, but for everything, for letting me go, for stepping aside so I could find this life. I'm happier than I ever imagined possible." Edmund looked at her, at the woman he had loved, now radiant with pregnancy and purpose, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. "You deserve this happiness, Beatrice. You always did. I'm sorry it took me so long to understand that loving someone sometimes means letting them go." "Have you found happiness?" she asked gently. "In your own life?" Edmund considered the question. "Not the happiness I once imagined," he admitted, "but something real nonetheless. Catherine brings me joy I didn't know existed. My work with the clinic gives me purpose, and Constance and I have reached an understanding. We may never have the marriage you and Elias share, but we've built something functional, even occasionally warm. It's not what I dreamed of, but it's a life worth living." Beatrice smiled, her grey-green eyes warm with understanding. "That's all any of us can do, isn't it? Bloom where we're planted, even if it's not the garden we would have chosen." Indeed, the new East London medical mission opened in May, on a bright spring morning that seemed to promise new beginnings. The facility was beautiful in its functionality: clean, well-lit treatment rooms, a spacious educational centre, and Beatrice's medicinal garden, already planted and beginning to flourish. A bronze plaque near the entrance read, "The Ashford Reed Medical Mission, dedicated to serving all who seek care, regardless of means." The opening ceremony drew a diverse crowd: local residents who would benefit from the clinic's services, donors and supporters, journalists interested in this innovative approach to healthcare, and representatives from medical schools impressed by the training opportunities the facility would provide. Edmund stood with Constance, who held baby Catherine, and watched as Beatrice and Elias cut the ribbon, officially opening the doors. Beatrice had given birth 3 weeks earlier to a son they had named Thomas, and she looked tired but radiant, her husband's arms supportive around her waist. As they welcomed the first patients into the clinic, Edmund felt a profound sense of rightness. This was what wealth and position should be used for, not just maintaining social status, but creating genuine change in the world. Lady Agatha appeared at Edmund's elbow, her sharp eyes taking in the scene with satisfaction. "Well done, Mr. Ashford. You've helped create something that will outlast all of us, something that will touch thousands of lives. That's a legacy worth having." "It's Beatrice and Elias who deserve the credit," Edmund said. "I simply provided resources." "You provided more than that," Lady Agatha corrected. "You provided belief, support, and the willingness to invest in something beyond your own interests. That's rarer than you might think among men of your position." She paused, then added more softly, "And you've found a way to remain part of Beatrice's life without causing harm or scandal. That takes wisdom and restraint." Edmund watched as Beatrice showed a group of local women through the medicinal garden, explaining the properties of various plants, her face animated with passion for her subject. Elias stood nearby with their infant son in his arms, looking at his wife with undisguised love and pride. "She's exactly where she's meant to be," Edmund said quietly, "and so, I suppose, am I." Constance joined them, Catherine gurgling happily in her arms. "It's impressive what they've built here," she said, and Edmund heard genuine admiration in her voice rather than her usual calculation. "Perhaps we should bring Catherine here regularly, let her see this work as she grows. I'd like her to understand that privilege comes with responsibility." Edmund looked at his wife with surprise and something approaching affection. "I think that's an excellent idea." As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows of the new clinic, illuminating the faces of patients receiving care, students eager to learn, and dedicated staff committed to service, Edmund felt something shift inside him, a final release of the bitterness and regret that had shadowed him since his wedding day. He had made a terrible mistake at that altar, had married the wrong sister and paid the price in years of quiet desperation. But from that mistake had come Catherine, who brought him joy beyond measure. From that mistake had come his partnership with Constance, imperfect but functional, built on mutual respect if not passion. And from that mistake had come this clinic, this tangible good in the world, born from his desire to find meaning in a life that hadn't unfolded as he'd hoped. Beatrice caught his eye across the crowded room and smiled, a smile of friendship, of shared accomplishment, of mutual understanding. They would never have what they might have had, but they had something valuable nonetheless, a connection forged through adversity, a partnership in service of something larger than themselves, and the knowledge that even the wrong choices could eventually lead to right outcomes. Edmund smiled back, then turned to his wife and daughter, to the life he had been given rather than the one he had wanted. And for the first time since that fateful day at the altar, he felt something very much like peace. The past could not be changed. But the future could still be shaped into something meaningful, something good. And that, Edmund realized, would have to be enough. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what resonated with you most. Until next time, may you find the courage to bloom wherever you're planted.